Hello, I am Matt, and welcome to This Week at the Movies. We are mid-July, and that means we are the break between comic book tentpoles. Last week we got Superman. Next week we're getting Fantastic Four, and Eric and I will be back on Saturday next week to breaking down Fantastic Four. But this week we get a little something different. We get a horror movie, and we get one that will probably cause you some internal trauma as you remember what it was like to live in the United States during the spring of 2020. I am talking, of course, about I Know What You Did Last Summer, reboot of the 1997 horror movie classic, and Eddington, which is the latest from Ari Aster. I will also be giving you a couple thoughts on the Emmy nominations at the end, but let's dive in. First, we're going to talk about I Know What You Did Last Summer. This one, probably the biggest of the releases this week. It is set in Southport, once again, North Carolina, the home of the original film, I Know What You Did Last Summer, which was released in 1997. That one starred Sarah Michelle Gellar, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Freddie Prinze Jr., Ryan Phillippe. It spawned a sequel in 1998, and people probably haven't thought about it a ton since then. It was part of a wave of slasher films that took off in that late 90s, early 2000s, based on the boom created by Scream. Scream, which came out in 96, probably a longer enduring footprint. Also got its own reboot or legacy sequel or requel or whatever people have decided to call them, where they brought back Courtney Cox and Neve Campbell and some of the original stars. Same thing here with the new version of I Know What You Did Last Summer, but we kick off, of course, with a new group of people led by Madeline Klein, Chase Sui Wonders, Jonah Howard King, Tyreek Withers, Sarah Pigeon. They're out having a good time, enjoying the 4th of July. When an accident occurs, somebody ends up dead. They end up covering it up, trying to get away. A year later, they are back together, and they get a mysterious note that says somebody knows what they did last summer. You can probably guess where we're going from here. Killings occur, guy in a slicker with a big hook. They end up reaching out to people who survived a massacre of 97, which is not only part of canon in this movie, but part of history of the town. We get reappearances of Jennifer Love Hewitt as Julie James and Freddie Prinze Jr. as Ray. Look, the idea is sound. I know why they're doing this. I Know What You Did Last Summer, the original, isn't probably an iconic classic on the same level that I consider the original Scream. I didn't have strong feelings about rebooting it or the legacy or tarnishing it, but this one feels like kind of a by the numbers younger story until you get a little bit later. They have a couple of interesting flourishes, including a pop-up guest appearance cameo from an actor that was in the original film that is a little unexpected, but actually was one of the strongest sequences of this film for me. I like Jennifer Love Hewitt. I thought Freddie Prinze Jr. was fine. I did not really love the twist at the end of this one. And then there is a stinger in the mid-credits that sort of sets up that they want to reboot another franchise and a direction that they might go. This one is a thumbs down for me. This is actually one of my least favorite films of the year so far. I just didn't love what they were putting down. I didn't like the new characters. I felt like the story was stale. Some of the performances just didn't work. I thought this was kind of a borderline disaster. I'm pretty close to giving it 2 thumbs down. There are a couple of bright spots, as I mentioned. I really liked that cameo sequence. I thought that was interesting, mostly because of the performance and the performer we got. And I like Jennifer Love Hewitt. But this movie just really didn't work. It didn't give what I was looking for. I wasn't wild about the requel version of Scream that they did, but I did think that it had a little bit more promise and introduced promising new characters in a way that this one just really didn't. What they were building around the survivors out of that new group, I'm just not really interested in where they're going. I didn't really enjoy the ride here. It also felt a little overly long. It was an hour and 51 minutes. Maybe a tight 90 or 89 would have suited this a little bit better. It fell flat for me. This is one of the bigger disappointments of the summer, not because I had high expectations, but because it didn't even come close to sniffing the moderate expectations I had. The other release this week is more of an art house film, Eddington. This one comes from director Ari Aster, who gave us movies like Hereditary, Midsommar, and more recently, Beau is Afraid. He has quite a legion of fans. He does a lot of different kinds of movies, things that he has done for A24. This is another star-studded affair. We have Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, Emma Stone is here in this film, Luke Grimes, who I enjoy from Yellowstone. You have a whole bunch of different, Austin Butler pops up in here. It's a very strong cast. It takes us to a small town of Eddington, New Mexico in May of 2020. And if you're groaning, you know what is coming. It is the height of the COVID pandemic. Joaquin Phoenix plays a sheriff who is something of a COVID denier. Pedro Pascal plays a mayor who is something of a social climber trying to find ways to enforce his will on a town that's dying a little bit economically, although whether or not it's really his will and his plan or he's being used by somebody else comes out. Then you get the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis and the protests that follow find their way into Eddington. But this movie, for as much as the marketing campaign is about those nightmarish visions of 2020 that we all had, the movie and the story that it wants to tell isn't as interested in exploring those themes, or at least that's not what it felt like to me. This ends up being more of an interesting crime gone wrong kind of caper. It feels at some points, especially during the third act, a little bit Coen Brothers-esque in the way things are shot and in the way things are unfolding for our point of view character, which is Joaquin Phoenix. There are some weird tied-on storylines. Austin Butler drops in just a couple of sequences. Very interesting. Emma Stone. I was interested to see what she was going to do here. She doesn't have a huge character arc. A lot of this is really just built around Joaquin Phoenix, and it's kind of a character and an arc we've seen before. I jokingly called this the Joker Part 3 when I was talking about it in the aftermath to a friend. There are some elements of his character that will feel familiar and some elements of his journey as a character that will feel familiar. Pedro Pascal kind of pops up at times as a little bit of an adversary, doesn't have a huge arc. So even though they have a great cast, they aren't making a lot of that cast. I'm going to give this one a thumbs neutral. I didn't hate it. I did think in some ways it feels like it's in poor taste using elements of 2020, particularly COVID and the tragic things that happened to people who were stricken with that, and the Black Lives Matter movement and all that happened in the aftermath of the terrible thing that happened to George Floyd. It feels like it's used as a plot device here. Maybe other people that saw it would feel a little bit differently about the political statement, but it didn't feel like it necessarily all tied back together with the main crux of the story, which is following the sheriff who leads kind of a weird life of the mind and gets embroiled in a lot of weird things that don't go his way, and it ends up in some really dark and curious places too, with after a big set piece in the third act, which I thought was going to be kind of the end of the film, you end up spinning a little bit further into the future, and it ends up a little grim. There are parts of it I really liked. The craft here is very strong. Ari Aster gives us some very good craft, and I thought Joaquin Phoenix actually delivers a pretty strong lead performance. I just wasn't really taken with the character or his actions or the world and story that it was in service to, so I was a little bit thrown off by that. Again, you may feel differently. Some people have really loved this, some people have really hated it. I didn't fall on either polar extreme. I thought it was in poor taste at times, and I thought it was interesting at times, but didn't quite work for me. So those are the two big kind of releases in theaters. I know a new version of Smurfs is also out there. I have not seen that yet. I can't imagine that you're running out to see that one, but if you have little ones, that might be a good piece of family programming. So to recap, I Know What You Did Last Summer was a thumbs down for me. That is a reboot that I could have left in the past. Ari Aster's Eddington is a thumbs neutral. I thought it had its moments, but it didn't quite work for me. Before I get out of here, I thought I'd circle back. The Emmy nominations were announced this week. The Emmy is always kind of a little bit of a weird year because they run June 1st to May 31st. So things that happen the first 5 months of this year combined with things that happened the last 7 months of last year. So when The Bear is getting a ton of nominations, it's actually for season 3. Which is something to keep in mind. Some new shows that broke in. The Pit did fairly well. The Studio really did well for Apple. Shrinking getting a few. I was charmingly, pleasantly surprised about Harrison Ford getting a nomination. Honestly, for all the nominations that The Pit got, I don't think it got enough. I wish Taylor Dearden would have gotten a nomination. Dr. King. Uh, there's always some curious nominations. I don't feel like the Emmys hold my sway as much as things like the Golden Globes or the Oscars. We'll see it play out here in September. It never seems like shows that were really compelling that land in the fall, which is always a big time for movies, seem to have the same juice and staying power. By the time we get to Emmys, a lot of things that are done right in that close run up do a little bit better, but they did end up recognizing Andor. It didn't get a lot of acting nominations, which is a shame. They did. I wish they would have recognized The Rehearsal. I thought that was a fantastic season. Maybe a little more love for The Righteous Gemstones, a show that was ending that had some really fantastic moments and performances and guest performances. I really thought Bradley Cooper for his bottle episode to kickstart that season would have gotten in, but he didn't. No one's ever going to be totally happy. There were some good things. There were some not so good things. And that seems to be the way it goes with a lot of these award shows. Be curious to see who wins, to see if The Bear continues to kind of keep steamrolling. People weren't as high on that third season. We've gotten some mixed reactions to the fourth season, which is currently out there now as well. So we'll see how that all turns out. But we'll be back next week looking at the Fantastic Four, maybe talking about some of the previous iterations of the Fantastic Four. Eric will be back with me next week as we talk about that. Until then, we hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we'll see you at the movies.